everybody. You are listening to Renewal Cast today, a weekly podcast that features interviews, discussions, and teaching on various biblical and theological subjects. My name is Coalt Robinson, and Jay Whiff and I do this because we believe that our minds are to be shaped and renewed by the life-giving and transforming Word of God through the power of the Holy Spirit. So we pray that for the next few minutes that you would just see Jesus more clearly. Today on the podcast, we have Mike Beck. And Mike Beck is a pastor, a great thinker. He's very interested in a guy named Meredith Klein. And today we're going to talk about Meredith Klein and why Meredith Klein matters. So enjoy the podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Renewal Cast. Today we're going to do an episode with Mike Beck. Mike has been on our program a few times, and we're really pleased to have him back and share with us about his new book, and we're really excited to talk about that. So glad you can join us from New Zealand.
Great to be with you guys.
Yeah, technology is amazing that you can do this.
Yeah, and it's good that the time zone worked well for us as well, because that's the next challenge, right? To try and get it synced up is a bit of a mission.
Yeah, what time is it there?
It is 10 o'clock in the morning, so this is good. We've just had daylight savings, so this is perfect.
Okay.
Nice and fresh, cup of coffee, ready to go.
On Thursday?
Yes, on Thursday, yeah, so ahead of you guys, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so tomorrow still happens. That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the people listening to this, that's going to be totally irrelevant. They'll just know that you're tomorrow. But... Well, yeah. Thanks for joining us. And Mike, will you just take a few minutes, introduce yourself again to our audience and what you do, and we'd love to hear a little bit about you.
No problem. Yeah. Well, I always start off with just to let people know about the accent. You know, I'm from South Africa originally. We've just mentioned New Zealand, but I'm not from New Zealand. So if there are any people listening who are from New Zealand, they'll pick that up immediately. So from South Africa, we moved to New Zealand in 2005 to plant the church that we did then. And we were freshly trained and, sort of sent from our sending church in South Africa. And we planted here in the capital of New Zealand, right in the middle of the North and the South Island. And I've been in ministry ever since as the pastor of Gracenet Community Church. What else? I've been married 19 years, got 5 kids, just recently had twins. So that's keeping us busy. We're part of the 1699 confessional churches here in New Zealand, the Reformed Baptists. So we've been happily walking with some like-minded brothers here in New Zealand for a while. In terms of the academic side, most of my studying happened in South Africa. My sending church was very involved with the South African Theological Seminary, so kind of just started there and kept on going with them and stuck with them all the way through to PhD. And that was on Meredith Klein. In fact, we'll be talking about that. The PhD dissertation became the book, and other than that, just pastoring. And I started teaching at our Reformed College here, Grace Theological College. I teach Old Testament and Hebrew, and what else? Yeah, and then I run a podcast as well. So 2H Sojourner is something that we try and run fairly regularly, sort of episodes around biblical theology and systematic theology, and try to keep a clinionian focus. And yeah, that's enough. That keeps me busy. That fills my plate. That's for sure.
Yeah, that sounds like it.
Yeah,
and maybe you'll get to this. Maybe this is a kind of an inroads into the conversation today. But you did your PhD on Meredith Klein. How did you become interested in Meredith Klein? Where did you first interact with material?
I mean, I suppose the thing that actually got me into Meredith Klein, interestingly enough, was church planting. It's not the most intuitive connection, but what happened was, we've come from a South African context where everything is, obviously it's that, the country's not Christian, but it comes from a strong Dutch Calvinism. And so there's a strong Christianity that runs through the culture. And so you're planting a church or in ministry in South Africa. It's it's not quite at least when I was in South Africa, it wasn't so. The culture was not so opposed to Christianity as it is in New Zealand, or it wasn't as aggressively secular, or something along those lines. But when we came to New Zealand, immediately we just got slapped in the face with this aggressive kind of secularism, and very different. So we, as church planners, obviously you're planning a church, you want to reach unbelievers, you want to go about doing your ministry well. And so the question before us was just, okay, well, what do we do with the culture? How do you plant a church? How are you supposed to live in this culture faithfully? Are we supposed to just get into politics? Do we need to start Christian businesses? Do we need to, make Christian music, or do we just need to preach the gospel faithfully and carry on and live as the church in the world? And what does that look like? At what level does is it salt and light? At what level is it an attempt to transform culture and so forth? So you can see how that enters right into that cultural Christ and culture discussion. And so that's a back and forth, in the Reformed camp, a lot of bickering, a lot of squabbling about that issue. And the deeper you go, you sort of realize, okay, actually covenant theology is at the heart of it. And that's where Meredith Klein comes in. And once I started seeing what he was saying and why that mattered, I think that's kind of
who is
that's when I wanted
Meredith
to really
Klein?
take a long, solid look, not only at Kline, but what people were saying about him, what he was saying to others, and just evaluating the whole thing. So that's kind of a long and short of it. Yeah. Well, Meredith Klein was, what should we say? Well, he, I think I would put him as an Old Testament scholar, right, in the Reformed tradition. So that's kind of, your basic Meredith Klein. He passed away about, was it 16 years ago, around 2007. But he was just, a brilliant, unique, sort of brilliant scholar, thinker. Even his enemies thought so. No one really disputes that point. He was just really an incredible guy to read, very stimulating, even if you disagreed with him. And just one of those, once every once in a while, a thinker like that comes along. So, everyone sort of appreciates him at that level. But he had a long career in Old Testament. Through, he was taught at the Westminster Theological Seminaries, both of them, mostly California, though. A long stint at Gordon Conwell as well. And he did some heavy-hitting work in suzerain vassal treaties, 2nd millennium BC. What else? He's also well-known. I think if people do recognize his name, it's usually in connection with his framework interpretation of Genesis 1. So that's usually quite controversial, and that's unfortunately what he's connected with. But there's really so much more to him. I mean, that was just kind of the beginning, and I think what people should know him for is the way he really elaborated on Gerhardus Voss's biblical theology. So a good, solid, reformed biblical theology, and when it came to, it's almost like he took Voss and those things that were quite latent in Voss, and he just ran with them and developed them, and things around eschatology, the sacred, the secular. Obviously, that's where it ties into the Christ and culture debate. And one of the reasons I really like Kline is that he provided, he wasn't just prepared to accept the dogmatics as it was thrown at him, just a confession for a confession's sake. He wanted to make sure that, what was being believed in covenant theology and being held forth in the confession was in fact, exegetically very, very, very valid. And so he did some strong exegetical work in support of covenant theology, traditional covenant theology. So it gives it kind of a fresh.
So he didn't write at a very popular level. Who would be some people?
I suppose that's Kline in a nutshell. More we could say, but just to give some
what he said.
listeners an introduction. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want to think about sort of, I suppose Meredith Klein directly, that is a kind of, that's a niche. We need more of that, to be honest. Just people that will look at his thought and sort of make it a bit more accessible. But Lee Irons is someone I always recommend people go and look to, and he's got a great website called Upper Register. And he's over the years just processed Klein's thought and presents it really beautifully. I wouldn't say it's like super popular or anything as a level of writing, but so even Irons is quite academic, but it's a million times more understandable than Kline to get introduced to his thought. And many people have been introduced to his thought. There are some other books that have been written along the way. I mean, Michael Horton, I would say, is an important author. In fact, it might have even been the way I got into Kline, now that I think about it. Horton, in all of his writings, but a certain grouping of books. So, Where in the World is the Church? He wrote a book called Where in the World is the Church? Really helpful kind of introduction to what Kline's saying. Even his Intro to Covenant Theology would be very close to what Kline's saying. And now that I'm thinking about it, Sacred Bond by Michael Brown and was it Zach Kill? They wrote a great intro. It's again, it's their own take. It's not exactly, they're not quoting Kline verbatim and trying explicitly to explain his material, but it ends up being a great summary. Van Drunen, I would say as well, in his book Living in God's Two Kingdoms, that first half gives like a great summary of what the kind of thing that Kline's putting forward in terms of a covenant theology. But of course, there's more to Kline, and that's the difficulty, because he's written some really profound things that have not yet become too overly sort of accessible, I suppose.
The title of your book is Covenant Lord and Cultic Boundary.
At the moment, it's just all related to
Inquiry Concerning Meredith Klein and the Reformed
he's written so much about so many other things. So,
what does that mean?
Some more of that. So that's yeah. So that is not one of these books that make it accessible. I didn't write it for a popular audience. I mean, as I said, it's sort of an adaptation of my PhD. So it was written for an academic audience, and it was somewhat tweaked to form that book. And some of the dissertation-oriented material was taken out, and so hopefully it's a little bit more accessible than the dissertation itself. But yeah, it's definitely still academic. The whole idea with the covenant, Lord, and cultic boundary thing is kind of already. Well, let's put it this way: it's gonna appeal to people that already know the discussion, because everyone, all these groups, right, are talking about God is the covenant Lord. That's a reformed way of thinking, right? It's kind of it's a rallying cry of reformed thought. You have God who is sovereign, God who relates to his people via covenant. So everyone agrees on that. But then the rallying cry usually continues from that point, saying, okay, well, as a result, because Christ is sovereign, and because God is the covenant Lord, therefore go and every square inch, take it all, redeem culture, redeem everything, and go and start businesses in the name of the kingdom, and it just undergoes under the banner of this rallying cry. And what Kline did was he came along and said, well, that's great. We all believe in covenant Lord, but there is this cultic boundary, and we're using the word cultic there, not in like Jehovah's Witness cult, but more like cult and culture. Right, so sacred and secular, religious, non-religious, holy, non-holy, that sort of thing, and there's this boundary that we have to think more clearly about in terms of what exactly is qualifying as the sacred or the holy, and what exactly is the non-holy, and what is the profane, and what is the just in a kingdom of Satan, so to speak, and how does this all fit together? If you're if you're mowing the grass, on a Sunday after, oh, not on a Sunday, let's stay out of that, but like on a Saturday, and there you are mowing the lawn, and you're having a great time, the sun's shining, and, is that exactly the same sort of activity? Is that as sacred as taking communion on a Sunday? Or is there sort of both are obviously legitimate, but isn't one holier than the other? Is one non-holy even, yet legitimate? Those kinds of questions. So in some ways, the whole book is a giant question around this title, right? Everyone agrees that God is Lord and he's the covenant Lord, but where exactly is this cultic boundary? Meredith Klein put it in a certain place. People have challenged that. And then that's where the subtitle comes in. It's a dialectic inquiry. That's just to do with the research methodology. So I'm not using that in any kind of Barthian sense. If anyone, sometimes we'll talk about dialectical theology and that sort of thing. That's not what we're on about there, but more just a systematic reasoning process, that juxtaposes, the two ideas and then tries to resolve it. So it's just, for me, when I was researching the question, it allowed a genuine process of exploration. Let's see what Kline says. Let's see what the others say. Let's go back and forward in this dialectic, and let's use all that to evaluate the whole thing at the end. So that's kind of the idea. But in the most simple terms possible, really all the book's about is just to tell. And everyone would have felt this, you become a Reformed Christian, you think, wow, everyone's going to agree. Surely, at this point, you've landed not only in Christianity, but in Reformed Christianity. And yet pretty soon you realize actually on this point of what the church should be doing in relation to the world, what individual Christians should be doing in relation to culture, that there's quite a heated debate and quite varied opinions. And it's quite, quite radically different. The one view from the other. So, rather than waste time reading the blogs just being nasty to one another, the better idea is to kind of just focus on covenant theology, because what Kline shows is that that's going to matter. And actually at the heart of the debate, that's what's going on. So really the book is just like making
what some of those options are for
going, let's stop talking periphery and let's just get down to the core, figure out your covenant theology, and then you'll figure out the rest. Yeah. Well, okay. Within the Reformed camp, there's it's a little bit more limited, but maybe it's good just to set it against the, I remember someone said, all of philosophy is a footnote to Plato, right? So it's something similar with Richard Niebuhr's famous book. He wrote that book, Christ and Culture, and everything's kind of a footnote to that book, it seems, in this discussion. And you've got these 5 models that everyone talks about. I talk about it in the book. Christ against culture, Christ of culture, Christ above culture, Christ and culture in paradox, Christ, the transformer of culture. So we're only concerned with a few of those, because Christ against culture would be like the Amish, or let's get right out of Dodge, and like the monks, or let's just go and form a monastery in the desert or something like that. So we're obviously wanting to be a bit more engaged in that. Then you got on the other side of that spectrum, the Christ of culture, which is a kind of syncretistic view, liberals, who say that basically, we don't have to do anything with culture, just leave it as is, and, we'll just seep Christianity into it as is. So as Niebuhr himself says, that view is not very plausible for anyone who takes the Bible seriously. Then you've got the Roman Catholic sort of Thomistic Christ above culture idea, so we're not really concerned with that. So the two things that Reformed guys tend to think about the most are the Christ and culture in paradox view, and the Christ, the transformer of culture view. Christ and culture in paradox is typically associated to Lutheranism. Well, Niebuhr does associate that anyway, and then the big Calvinism gets the transformationalist label, and it's interesting because Niebuhr himself, doesn't ever refer to Calvin. He calls Calvin this big proponent of the view, but he never actually refers to Calvin or cites Calvin. So for some reason, it's sort of taken hold that the Reformed view is Christ the transformer of culture or transformationalist. So we just, the gospel is going to actually get hold of politics. It's going to get hold of society. It's going to change it. It's part of its deal. And that has become typically now associated with the neo-Calvinist option within, if we want to call it that, or model for engagement with culture. And you might say that the Christ and culture and paradox sort of Lutheran connection there has become more associated with the Reformed two-kingdom view. And so these tend to be your two options that you have to think about seriously. And you do have to think about seriously because you start going down this track. And this is, again, back to my church planning, starting this whole process out and thinking about these things. You realize, to buy into one thing at one level is going to just really lead to a whole set of implications for all sorts of theological issues. As soon as you sort of decide, okay, well, this is my position on the culture piece, all of a sudden you got Christology that needs to be thought about. You got anthropology, soteriology, missiology, ecclesiology. So you got all these things that start coming into play. And so, it does require a bit of thought. There is enough incentive there to look through these things carefully. And obviously I would, personally, I lean more to kingdoms, and that's because of what I think Kline is saying, and some good examples or some good arguments, at least, that he makes. Not concerning the two kingdom thing directly, but I think the implication of his covenant theology is that it's you have to kind of you have to lean in that direction. Although in the study, I try and be as fair as possible to the neo-Calvinists as well, and try and make some space.
It's a big discussion
in a Klinian way,
isn't it?
Toward neo-Calvinism as well. So that's a whole other discussion.
You mentioned
that's kind of the
covenant theology being
so that's kind of a messy
starting
answer to your question.
Point. And you quote Van Drunen at one point. If we do not understand the biblical theme of the two atoms and its corresponding doctrine of justification, then it is impossible to hold a biblical view of Christianity and culture. Why is it so important to get justification right first?
Yeah. No, I mean, that is the heart of it, I think. It's the reason that, you start, it's a funny thing. You start off with this question of Christ and culture, at least my road in anyway. You start off thinking about it in terms of a church planning situation or a missionary situation or whatever it is. And, you realize that the base of it is covenant theology. So, okay, that's good. You kind of figure out, all right, I need to figure this thing out. And then if I figure that out, I will figure the rest out. But then you realize, as I was kind of hinting at earlier on, you have this host of theological implications, right? And one of those things you realize actually concerns justification quite clearly. When you start the question of how you're going to move forward with or which side you're taking, for lack of a better expression, with the culture thing, you realize actually that's going to coming with that is there's this justification view bundled, and so in fact recently, what was it? I'm not sure where this is in Sproul's book but I was reading through Pat Abendroth's Covenant Theology, and he quotes. He's got this great quote from R.C. Sproul. And let me read this to you. I'll just pull it up here quickly. He says, at the heart of this question of justification and imputation is the rejection of what is called the covenant of works. In this work of fulfilling the covenant for us in our stead, theology speaks of the active obedience of Christ. Without Christ's active obedience to the covenant of works, there is no reason for imputation. There is no ground for justification. If we take away the covenant of works, we take away the active obedience of Jesus. If we take away the active obedience of Jesus, we take away the imputation of his righteousness to us. If we take away the imputation of Christ's righteousness to us, we take away justification by faith alone. If we take away justification by faith alone, we take away the gospel. I actually never read that quote until very recently, and I think it's fantastic. That's exactly what I think Kline is arguing for. It reminds me also of Machen's final telegram, to Murray, where he says, "I'm so thankful for the active obedience of Christ, no hope without it." You guys obviously heard that one, but I mean that's it. That's what we're talking about here. We have to, if there's no, if the question of culture depends on whether or not we should take up Adam's task, and Adam's task was a covenant of works, then you could see how that is immediately related to the matter of active obedience. We want to make sure not to try and replace what Jesus has done for us, especially if we're going to use the language of redeeming culture. That gets a little bit scary, because then we're saying we're not only doing what Jesus has come to do as the last Adam, but we're doing so in a redemptive way. And I think that's where it gets a little bit intertwined with this matter of whether we ought to touch what Jesus has done for us. The act of obedience is Jesus doing everything we couldn't do, and so what you find is that with those who want to take up that Adamic commission again and think about our task as a matter of redeeming culture, you often see hand in hand with that a kind of dismissal or a lessening of the need of Christ's active obedience, because they don't mix. You have to either have active obedience, or you have to you have Jesus do it for you, or you kind of you take it up on your own terms. You just see Jesus' death as giving you a new shot, giving you a new start and a new opportunity to pick it up from where Adam left off. And so obviously, we're talking about culture, but we're kind of talking about the rest of the stuff Adam had to do as well. And so it gets very enmeshed very quickly. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's where you have mono-covenantalism come in, which is often the covenantal theology undergirding many of the theonomist and transformationalist views, where we want to leave some space for our own works, effectively works of culture, but obviously that's going to seep into works under the law as well. So they tend to deny the active obedience of Jesus and think about it more in terms of just his passive substitutionary work. And we have to then everything is of grace. Adam was in the garden by grace before the fall, and grace constitutes everything. Law regulates everything. So basically there we are. The church is like Israel, is like Adam. We're all constituted by grace. It's all God's condescending grace to us. And now we just, blessing comes through obedience. So we just have to try our best. We have to do what Adam was doing, what Israel was doing. And, hopefully we do a better job than they did, which I think is kind of crazy. That's where the whole gospel, gets shot to smoke at that point. So, I think that's the whole reason Machen was so happy that there was an act of obedience, because otherwise there is no hope. To go back to the garden, I mean, my goodness, the biblical story is enough to show us that we're not going to get it right. Adam failed, Israel failed. I mean, I hate to break it to you, but we're not going to make it. We're not going to do it. So we need Jesus. That's the whole reason he needed to do what he did, and that included his.
That takes a load off, huh?
and his current status as the king who has dominion over all things. So we don't have to try and redo that task for him.
Yeah, hey, I don't want to get ahead. I don't want to get ahead of things here, but you used the phrase theological implications, and you were talking about how you were looking through these things in regarding to church planting. How did all of this help church planting? I mean, what did it, practically, how did it work itself out?
Tremendous implications for church planting, I think. And again, if anyone does want to read some more of this, Michael Horton's book, you could actually, I really wish they would publish these together. I think there would be such a cool, sort of double volume set or something. But Michael Horton's Where in the World is the Church? And then his more recent book, what is it called? Gospel Commission or something like that. I think if you Google that should come up. But where he kind of, I think, in that book shows how this really maps out in terms of our Great Commission and for the local church. What does it mean? The one book, Where in the World is the Church, kind of deals with the individual Christian, the church as organism, you might say. You as a Christian out there in the world, what does that look like? But when we're thinking about church planning, I'm thinking of the church as an organization. We're that Sunday morning. What are we supposed to be doing? Should we get to church? Yeah, there's something going on, down the road, and get our pickets out and go and start picketing in front of the House of Parliament just to get them to stop doing any number of bad things that they're doing. Is that the job of the church on Sunday morning, or is the church's job to preach the gospel and to be clear about their mission, to avoid a missional creep, as Horton puts it, which I think is great. And how are we going to stay clear on that mission? When there are so many things that lure the church into other areas, politics. I mean, they are very tempting. The church has something to say, and there are all these temptations to kind of move in different directions. It seems so uneventful in some ways, just to continue to meet and be faithful and word and sacrament ministry and so forth, and to keep the church as a kind of embassy of heaven and avoid partisan politics and so forth. It seems so uneventful and boring, and yet this is the way that we need to press ahead. This is part of the mission. If you abandon that, you really are just another social club. In Babylon, you might say. This is the thing that we have that we've got to continue on holding up. So I think it's all good and well to say that, but how can we? What is the source of our conviction there? And well, that's really all the stuff we're talking about here. You're only really going to have a conviction on that particular point if you settle the matter of whether the Reformed Two Kingdom project is, or doctrine or theology is saying something valid or not. And if not, then we do need to revise the way that a church plant goes about its business. It needs to be more involved with all sorts of things. And I think that's what you see. You see a church that's transformationalist. They tend to be very lots of ministries, this ministry, that ministry, like thousands and thousands of ministries, and not so much of a focus on word and sacrament. And churches that kind of lean more to kingdoms, I think you'll see less of an attempt to try and make every secular vocation sacred, and have 1,000 different ministries to make that happen, but rather just to see a legitimacy in what you do out there in the world, that make a good shoe, sell it at a fair price, as Luther said, and that's legitimate. That's fine. And then, be salt and light in your community. You don't have to turn music into Christian music in order for it to be legitimate music. You don't have to be a Christian author, be a Christian who is an author. You don't have to, and you keep going along those lines. So you just go to church. It becomes really simple. Go to church, preach the gospel, be part of the local church, and then be a Christian, versus, take whatever it is that you want to do, baptize it, and form like a cultural ghetto version of it, which unfortunately is what it amounts to most of the time. In that, it's one thing to say, well, let's make Christian movies, but it ends up becoming a subculture that's really no one cares about those Christian movies except some Christians, and everyone else just thinks it's lame. So it doesn't really do its job. Versus where you have people that are perhaps directors of films, but are not making Christian movies per se, or don't feel that they need to make that a Christian movie in order for it to be legitimate. They just need to be a Christian, that's going to guide them. That's going to keep them morally in check. That's going to, provide the boundaries for them. And that tends to be a better model. It tends to be more workable, realistic, because you're planting this church, and all of a sudden this massive burden is taken off the planter or the preacher or the pastor, and the people. And it just becomes a workable thing that you can actually do every Lord's Day, thick and thin, come persecution or sunshine. There you are. You're pressing on. You're doing your job, and you're seeing impact in your community. In that, the people are feasting on the gospel and going in and being Christians in the world. Whereas I think what I've seen is transformationalist churches often just get quite burdened with, and maybe this missional creep thing gets burdensome and becomes too wide, and it's not really that effective, and so those are some of my observations. But again, the source material for all of that, the theology, is going to be down to this thing that Meredith Klein's saying.
Yeah. I wanted to ask the question, partly because I wanted to ask another one, and I might get myself in a little bit of hot water. But what are some of the big problems that you see with the modern church planting movement? You mentioned transformationism. Maybe explain that a little bit.
Yeah.
But I hear a lot of church planters. I mean, besides the fact that many I fear have gone into church planting without thinking through some of these things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
But I mean, we hear phrases like rethink church and
yes,
all that kind of stuff.
Right. Totally. Yeah. And look, I was before I started my PhD research, I was the what do they call it? Network director. Regional director, I can't remember what it was called for Acts 29. So, and we were part of Acts 29. We are part of Acts 29. So it's kind of quite a big tent, church planting organization. And you come across all sorts of church planters, all sorts of theological sort of backgrounds and traditions. But a lot of that has been the material around how to plant a church and becoming trained in church planting has really been impacted by transformationalist thinking. And I deal with Frame and his perspectivalism in the book, but Frame his influence is ubiquitous. I mean, even Tim Keller and the way that he adopted a lot of those ideas and the way that then flows into more popular church planting training material. So it almost I dare to say it's kind of the norm, to think about church planting, if we're talking broader evangelical, maybe even broader evangelical reformed, you're thinking in terms of a transformationalist mindset, together with your hardcore Dutch neo-Calvinism and those confessional traditions where they have that anyway, which means that, you're going into this not so much, not having, or maybe you have figured it out beforehand. Maybe you have worked it through. Maybe you are a transformationalist by serious conviction. And that would be one thing. I think at least that, as you say, at least they've thought it through rather than just head in. And probably I was guilty of that, just jumping in and just having to figure it out, while running. But I think what happens often is that people just didn't even realize there was another way to do it, and so they get started and they do. I mean, the church crashes after a year, and the pastor's burnt out, and the planter never wants to plant again. And why are you so tired? Well, because we wanted to start a shelter, we wanted to start a Christian rock band, we wanted to make Christian movies, all within the first month of our church plant, and it's like, okay, well, actually, all you needed to do was rent a hall and preach the gospel and just keep doing that, and actually that was, I think that you have a simpler model there that probably your people would appreciate, because they don't have to, be roped into all these things they're not being paid for, and they can just come to church and be served by the word, which rather than, they're tired. They're already tired from their very busy schedules, and which is a good, godly thing for them to be part of. I mean, they have to make money for their families, and this is tiring. And so, they have to get to church. They need not to be roped into a whole filmmaking industry. And I know I'm unfairly harping on that illustration, but you know what I mean? Just as an example, or let's start a Christian coffee shop is my other pet peeve, or heaven forbid, a Christian gym or something like that, where it's like, I just want to come to church and hear the gospel and just be fed by word and sacrament and be, feast on the gospel, and then go and, be out there and make a good shoe and sell it at a fair price and, provide for my family. And you feel like if you go to these churches, you feel like you're not aspiring to enough. It's not enough just to do that. When in fact, that's exactly what we have to do. We do have to aspire to live quietly and godly lives. And again, while I'm touting Horton's books, let me throw another one in there. Ordinary. He wrote a book called Ordinary. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a Michael Horton fan. I think he's great.
It's a great book.
Yeah, it is. It's fantastic and a helpful antidote to a lot of this stuff as well. So yeah, I do agree. I think it's church planning has been hit with this transformationalist thinking perhaps more than any other.
Have you gotten any pushback from the book?
I have not. I'm surprised, actually. I'm bracing for impact. Obviously, I mean, there's no ways you get to write a book like that and say the things I've said. And I did try and be as fair as possible, but it's really an impossible task. I mean, I'm dealing with Doivedians, number one. I mean, that's a whole thing, and then of course frame and perspectivalism. So, I wanted to listen to what they had to say and, respond hopefully in an even-handed way. So I think, rather than just join the shouting match. So hopefully, even if people don't agree with what I'm saying at the end in my personal evaluation, hopefully, I'm not setting up straw men or, just not listening sympathetically or so hopefully people can appreciate that. And so in that regard, I've actually had very encouraging feedback. People have said as much, that they've appreciated the way in which at least their position gets a hearing and so forth. But as I say, that can only last for so long. So far, very happy with the feedback though. I never, it's quite a nerdy book, so you don't know. I mean, like if one person reads it and that person is not your mom, then you're really doing well, But it seems like it's. I think it's just kind of a hot topic. It always is, I think. But theonomy seems to be making a comeback. So there's that, and then of course. COVID has exasperated the whole matter a little bit, at least in New Zealand circles. So, in fact, when I was writing it, the COVID thing hit, and it was kind of interesting just seeing how people were dealing with that. And as soon as the government starts telling the churches what to do, and all of a sudden you got this like roaring church state debate going on, even amongst people who didn't care about it normally. So I think, it just so happens that this is kind of in vogue. So anyways, I think it's hopefully just been helpful in at least helping people to see some of the subtleties behind the debate rather than just, again, getting on the blogs and shouting at each other, Yeah.
Well, Mike, thanks a ton for coming on and walking us through this a little bit. And we'll
pleasure.
Put links to your podcast and your book and things in our show notes. And boy, maybe somebody else will read it and interact with you on that. But thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. No worries. Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. You can find more about us. You can find past episodes on the web. Check out renewalcast.com or find us on social media at Renewal Cast. See you next time.